And our third and final story for this edition of the Rolling Stone is an addendum to part of the regular On the Stone video that I uploaded on Wednesday, mea culpa, regarding Michael Flynn. If you watched that On the Stone video, we were talking about rule of law versus rule of men. And to kind of buttress my point that the rule of men is superseding the rule of law, I talked about what was happening to Michael Flynn, who was Donald Trump's first national security advisor until he stepped down in February of 2017. He pled guilty to lying to the FBI about communications that he had with the Russian ambassador, Sergei Kislyak, from the election of 2016 to Inauguration Day of 2017. But then he walked back to that plea because he said that the FBI had set him up. And lo and behold, we now have evidence via unsealed FBI documents in the form of handwritten notes, which prove that actually, yes, Flynn wasn't just talking out of his hat. The FBI did set up a perjury trap for him for the express purpose of getting him fired at the very least, and at the most, sending him to jail. So we know all of that. So the Justice Department and Attorney General William Barr, based on that new evidence, they actually motioned, okay, all charges against Michael Flynn are going to be dropped. Because obviously, while he may have broken the letter of the law in lying to the FBI, he didn't break the spirit of the law because his intention was never to lie. The FBI, when they questioned him in such a way so that Flynn was going to end up lying to them, no matter what. And then they could come back and say, aha, you lied. Therefore, now we're going to throw you in jail. You know, in Soviet Russia, jail breaks you, or something like that. Might as well laugh at that because that's as funny as I'm going to get today. So, that should be the end of it, right? Case closed. Well, not so much, because a district judge in Washington, D.C., Judge Emmett Sullivan, extended the case by soliciting amicus briefs to allow for public comment on Flynn's criminal case. So in other words, Judge Emmett Sullivan, instead of saying, he basically told the Department of Justice, no, you can't just drop these charges against Michael Flynn. We are going to open discussion up, as it were. So now outside parties can file amicus briefs, friends of the court briefs, wherein they will be able to argue why the charges should not be dropped against Michael Flynn. That is ultimately what is happening. And then get this. This is from the Gateway Pundit. Judge Sullivan also appointed retired Clinton appointee Judge John Gleeson to argue against the government's motion to dismiss the charge against Flynn. Okay? So in spite of everything that has been revealed, in spite of this new evidence that we have, that the FBI deliberately set up a perjury trap for Flynn, Judge Emmett Sullivan is saying that's not good enough. Sullivan is, in other words, saying, I still think that Flynn is guilty. Guilty of deliberately deciding to break the law and then breaking the law. And therefore, no, Justice Department, you can't just drop those charges. This has to keep going. This is going to be prolonged until everyone involved just gives up or is dead, or they finally end up at the other end, of the meat grinder, so worn and battered that the message that everyone else is going to get is that I'm not going to work with any administration that is not within the fold of progressivism and of the critical theory, intersectionality, woke, progressive movement. I'm not touching anything like that with a 10-foot pole. I don't want what happened to, any of those people to happen to me. I mean, I've got a career to think of. I've got a family to support. I've got at least a decent name to uphold. I don't want to spend the time and the money and the heartache and the tears and the blood and the sweat just to end up like that. I mean, look at him. Look at him. Have you seen what meat looks like after it gets out of a meat grinder? It ain't pretty. So, that is what's happening. Now, even better than this is that what Judge Sullivan did by telling the Justice Department that they cannot just drop these charges against Flynn, is he has actually gone against judicial precedent. So many people on the left talk about precedent, and people on the right talk about it too. Well, here is an instance of where a judge has gone against precedent, but nobody is saying anything, on the left at least, because it fits their agenda. This is from Forbes. I'm going to quote a story that Mark Chenoweth wrote at Forbes. Quote, U.S. District Court Judge Emmett Sullivan disregarded two controlling precedents from higher courts with his decision to appoint John Gleeson as amicus curiae in the U.S. versus Michael Flynn case this week. Judicial conduct similar to Sullivan's in these prior, far less politically charged cases was roundly and unanimously condemned by Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, D.C. Circuit Judge Sri Srinivasan, and their colleagues across the ideological spectrum. So whether or not one agrees with the Department of Justice's call to drop its charges against President Trump's former National Security Advisor, General Michael Flynn, there should be widespread agreement that Jay Sullivan has veered way out of line. 1 week ago, the U.S. Supreme Court issued a 9-0 decision authored by Justice Ginsburg that took judges to task for a similar amicus antics. Her opinion for the court in U.S. v. Sinning and Smith upbraided the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit for violating a basic aspect of legal proceedings called the party presentation principle. In a nutshell, this concept dictates that judges must decide the case as presented by the parties before them. They are not to go out questing for dragons to slay or issues to tackle that the parties have not brought before them. Because that's the thing with amicus briefs. They bring up new sides of a question, new facets of an argument. They'll say, I think that the court should rule in this way because of blah, blah, blah. And someone else will say, I think that the court should rule in this way because A, B, C, X, Y, Z, 1, 2, 3, 1A, 1B, 1C, etc. And then, because what could happen here is that they could say, oh, you know what? Yeah, you know what? This raises a good point. They're getting more minds in to try and find some reason, to keep throwing the book at Flynn for whatever they can do, whatever they can get. And the long and the short of it, and I will just repeat what I said on Wednesday with our regular On the Stone video, is that it's further proof that the rule of law is dead. Or if it's not dead, then it's bleeding on the street. Because when you have a judge who can basically say that, no, this case is going to continue, and they pull out a legal trick like this that breaks precedent, which also breaks a Supreme Court decision, okay, and also contradicts new evidence that we have. This is the important point. New evidence that we have. You're saying that the rule of law doesn't matter. Evidence doesn't matter. If we get to the root of this, what Judge Sullivan is saying is that because Flynn was associated with the Trump administration and therefore with Trump, because therefore he is not ideologically pure, he is not in the club, he is guilty. That's what he's guilty of. And therefore he must be punished to the full extent of the law. It is not mind-boggling. It's not mind-boggling because, and it's not. In a sense, it's not even infuriating anymore, because this is now the new playing field. This is the new normal. The really discouraging aspect of all of this, the really infuriating thing about all this, is that Congress actually could fix this problem. Congress actually could really put the fear of God back into these courts, these rogue courts, who are acting as petty legislators. Because if you read the Constitution, if you read Article 3, which deals with the judiciary, it says that the judiciary power will be held by the Supreme Court and any other courts which the Congress will create. So Congress, okay, the Supreme Court is independent, but Congress actually makes up the other federal district courts and appellate courts. Okay, the judiciary doesn't do that. Congress does that. Congress could say, hey, you judges who are acting like petty legislators, who are actually, pulling all of these tricks, you know what? We have the power. We could completely rewrite the federal district court map. Just kind of wipe it clean, make new district courts, make new appellate courts, if we wanted. Because, of course, if you make a new federal district court map, then the appellate courts will have to be different as well. And so Congress could do that. Congress could kind of put the fear of God back into the court, kind of like what FDR did back in the, in the second half of the 30s, when the Supreme Court actually started finding a lot of his New Deal programs were violating the Constitution. And then FDR, he I don't agree with it, but he said, well, maybe we could, just expand the Supreme Court. Maybe there should be 12 justices on the court instead of just 9. Meaning that if that plan had actually succeeded, he would have been able to appoint 3 Supreme Court justices just like that. And since the Democrat Party held, I want to say that it held the House and the Senate at that time, they probably would have just been, they probably would have swum right through the confirmation process and been put on the court. That really spooked the court. And then, miraculously, they stopped finding a lot of New Deal programs, aspects of the New Deal, unconstitutional. Now, FDR had absolutely no authority to do that. The difference here is that Congress does have the authority to do it. It's right there in the Constitution. However, and this is where we get to the discouraging and the infuriating part, Congress does not have the brass or the steel to do that. The Democrat Party definitely isn't going to do it. And the Republican Party is made up of jellyfish, starfish, and gutless wonders. And I mean no disrespect to jellyfish or starfish, because I think that they are fascinating creatures and I would not want them associated with pretty much any Republican politician at this time. So that is the really infuriating part of all this. Now, where this is going to end up, I have absolutely no idea. If Sullivan gets away with this, that's really going to be an eye-opener about the foundational problems that we have in the country. But we are going to have to wait and see. Anyway, gang, I have talked for too long, as always, so I am wrapping things up here. As always, have a great weekend. Stay healthy, stay safe, stay dangerous, and I will see you all next time. Ciao.